back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and there's a whole lot to talk about from Ravnica Murders at Karlov Manor. I'm going to be doing 3 videos covering the cards that I want to talk about from this set. This one being the first, and this one being the video, I guess, just talking about the cards that we're all going to be playing in the Commander format, right? These are going to be the big ones, I think, the ones that are going to probably see the most play in the Commander format. There is a whole bunch more that certainly will see play. They're not going to be Commander staples. They're more niche. I try to stay away from the really niche ones in videos like this, but there are a couple that maybe could be considered that. These are the ones that we're definitely going to see in the Commander format, though. I got about 20 cards to talk about here. Then I'm going to make another one talking about maybe more niche things, but cards that I think are definitely worth talking about. And then, of course, I'm going to make a video about the Commanders as well. So let's get to it. We got a lot to talk about. I am first giving a shout out to Comeuppance, which of course is not a new card. It is a reprint. There's not a lot of great reprints in this set, I don't think. I mean, there's a couple of decent ones. This is the one that stood out for me, mostly because I think it's a great card. It is also one of those cards that is kind of expensive because they've never reprinted it. It is originally printed in C14, I believe, and it's never been reprinted. It's weird to see a Commander card, an actual Commander card printed in a Commander set that for some reason they don't reprint in other Commander sets, even though it is a card that gets played because it's like a, $14 card or something, right? Finally reprinted it, so I had to give it a mention. All right, let's get to it. Undergrowth Recon, 1 green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And I would say this is probably the most niche card of the group I'm talking about here, but obviously it's going to see a ton of play. I mean, this is very similar to Crucible of Worlds. Obviously, it's going to go in any deck that probably is playing a Crucible of Worlds that's green, because of course this card can only go in green decks. But of course, it's doing more than that in a way, because it's just returning a land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it doesn't count towards your land per turn like a Crucible of Worlds. You're actually playing it from your graveyard. So it counts towards your land drop per turn, whereas Undergrowth Recon is just getting that land back, and then you can also play a land for turn. So it is a little niche, but it's definitely going to be played in all those lands decks. I don't know, maybe. I think so. Seems pretty good in those decks. Okay, ends, Rags, Rampage. This is one of my favorites from the set. It's a card I had to read a couple times because it's doing a lot, and it's like, wow, that actually seems super good. So 3 red sorcery. Destroy all artifacts you don't control. Okay, so already that's pretty good. Then exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts that were put into graveyards from the battlefield this turn. So just a little bit of a side note here. This is the number of artifacts put into the graveyard this turn. So that guy who sacrifices all his treasures in response to you casting this spell, that is still an artifact put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn. It doesn't have to be from this spell. So if Buddy's got 12 treasure tokens lying around and he sacrifices them all in response to this, it will count those. So you're going to exile the top X cards of your library, and I will also point out any of those exile tribal decks might extra want to be playing this card. You may put a creature card exiled this way onto the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So you're going to put that creature directly in play. You can attack with it right away, and then you get it to your hand afterwards. You're not sacrificing it. So if it is a creature with a great ETB, like a Dockside Extortionist, you're going to get the ETB, return it to your hand, then you get to play it again. That seems pretty fantastic. I will point out, though, the cards you are exiling from the top of your library are just getting exiled, so you do have to be careful here, right? If your opponents all have like 30 artifacts in play or 40 or something, you might want to be careful. I mean, yes, you can dig really deep to get that card you want, but everything else is going to stay in exile, so you do have to be careful there. Really neat card. Moving along, Take the Bait. 2 red, white, instant. Cast this spell only during an opponent's turn and only during combat. Very specific. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn. Untap all attacking creatures and goad them. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. And it's funny, someone just pointed this card out because I did my 5 unique commander builds recently, just this last week. And one of the ones I mentioned was Najeela, and really janky way, maybe one of the only janky ways to build an Najeela deck, because it's such a powerful commander, is you use that 5-color ability on your opponent. opponents, giving them, you do a huggy theme or maybe a goad theme where you are using that ability on your opponents to give them extra combats. And it's really rare. It actually is pretty rare to give other people combats. And funny enough, this card came out like the next day. What an odd timing there. So of course, this card would absolutely go in that deck if you were building it. And it is a way to give your opponents extra combats, but it's way more than that. I mean, first of all, okay, cast this spell only during an opponent's turn and only during combat. You can just use this as a fog effect, right? Because of course, if someone Craterhoof Behemoths and comes at you, you go, okay, well, I'm going to cast this. It is their turn and it is during combat. You're going to prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn. So you've already done a fog effect. You saved your own life. But on top of that, now they're going to untap all attacking creatures they control, and they're going to be forced to attack any other opponents involved. Again, though, I will point out, even if you're the only person left, I talked about Goad in, well, I've talked about a Goad in a couple of videos. I just talked about how I think they're overdoing it. And of course, they put a whole lot more Goad out in this set. Big surprise. I also talked about in a rules video where if you're the only person left, the Goad essentially doesn't work because those creatures have to attack, but prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So it still doesn't matter, right? It doesn't actually do anything. All around, just a great spell. And where would you actually play this other than that in the Gila deck? It's just an all-around great spell that you could put in any commander deck. Next up, Case of the Shifting Visage. And this is a new card type we have. It is a subtype, an enchantment subtype. So 1 blue enchantment Case. There's a bunch of these in the set. They got a couple of different cycles in each color. I'm going to talk about a couple in a row here that I think are pretty darn good. This one at the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 1. So that's good. I mean, obviously it fits in all those Surveil decks, which there's going to be a lot more of those in the Commander format now after this set comes out. It also is just good in any deck where you want stuff in your graveyard. So if you're in a blue deck where you want stuff in your graveyard, look at the top card of your library, maybe chuck it in your graveyard if you want it there. To solve this case, there are 15 or more cards in your graveyard. So it says here, if unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step. So in order to get the solved part, the part at the end here, we need to, of course, do the part that requires us to solve it. And that means you just have to have 15 or more cards in your graveyard. Great. So if I play this right away, if I have at the beginning of my end step 15 or more cards in my graveyard, I get to solve it. And now once it's solved, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, copy that spell. That seems fantastic. It might take a little while if you're not in this theme, right? In other words, the theme of self-milling or filling your graveyard, right? Any deck that is doing that already, this is just a slam dunk. Just having all your creature spells be copied like that is really fantastic. So this could obviously fit really well in a self-mill or graveyard strategy in blue, but it could almost go in any deck later in the game. You just have stuff in your graveyard like it just happens incidentally, always in every commander game. Now you can slap this down and just start copying all your creature spells. Pretty great. Another one that's probably going to go in a lot of decks, Case of the Locked Hothouse. 3 and a green enchantment Case. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Again, back to that theme, although I will say it doesn't have to be in that deck, right? It doesn't have to be in the deck that wants to be playing additional lands on its turns, just like with their Surveil. It's just a nice little added bonus that might come into play. To solve this case, you have to control 7 or more lands, which again, I guess is extra good in certain commander decks, but I don't know if I've ever played a commander game ever where every single player had at least 7 lands in play, right? It happens all the time. So in order to solve this, not going to be that difficult for any commander deck to do, especially a green one. Once solved, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. That's always good. And you may play lands from the top of your library. That's always good. And cast creature spells and enchantment spells. That's pretty fantastic. I mean, it covers a lot, right? You can't cast instant sorceries, artifacts, planeswalkers, but that covers a lot. And obviously in certain decks, it's going to be a lot better. You can play lands, cast creatures, cast enchantments. You could put this in any deck, but extra good in a whole lot of decks. Next up, Profs Eidetic Memory. By the way, eidetic memory, for those who haven't heard it before, that's the actual term for photographic memory, which I believe I do have, although I've heard that you can't actually prove that you have a photographic memory. The technical term for photographic memory is eidetic memory. That's how I know I'm familiar with that term. So 1 and a blue, legendary enchantment. When Profs Eidetic Memory enters the battlefield, draw a card. You have the maximum hand size. Hey, there's something that everybody in the Commander format always wants to be putting in their deck. So we already got a lot of good stuff here, right? At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn more than one card this turn, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn, -1. So obviously that can go in a lot of decks. I will just point out right out of the gate, without having any other build around here at all, this comes down, draws you an extra card. You've now essentially triggered that last ability there, right? So it comes down, draws you a card, replaces itself, gives you no maximum hand size, and then at the beginning of combat, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. So it almost is worth it just to put this in a +1/+1 counter theme. If you're in blue, I mean, I guess if you were in a mono blue deck where you were doing that, because it is at the very least going to put 1 +1/+1 counter on a creature. Now that's not great. It gets a lot better though. I mean, every deck has card draw, right? So again, just like with having 7 lands in play, seems like it fits a certain theme. It actually fits every Commander deck. And drawing more than one card on your turn, maybe you're not going to be doing it a lot, but it does fit every Commander deck because every Commander deck has card draw. Moving on. Urgent Necropsy. And this one, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, sweet. A new interesting removal spell, because of course I always like the removal. I'm not sure where I fit on this one yet, so let's analyze it. 2 black and a green instant. So first of all, I'll just point out we are in black and green, which is already fantastic colors for removal. So there is that. As an additional cost to cast this spell, collect evidence X, where X is the total mana value of the permanents this spell targets. So collect evidence is the new ability from this set, one of the new abilities from this set, where you have to exile cards from your graveyard with a certain mana value. And of course here the mana value is X. So you're going to be essentially exiling the mana value of the cards from your graveyard that you're also going to be targeting on the battlefield, right? I hope that makes sense. So destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target enchantment, and up to 1 target planeswalker. So of course, up to meaning this is not like Decimate where you need the targets. You only need 1. You can just destroy an enchantment here if you really want to get it off the battlefield, right? Someone's got a Smothering Tithe, you really want to get rid of it, and you don't want to wait for the other targets, or maybe you just don't have anything in your graveyard because it just got exiled. You just have 4 mana value in your graveyard, so you exile that just to get the Smothering Tithe off the battlefield if you really need to. But of course, this can be 4 mana instant speed, destroy an artifact, creature, enchantment, and planeswalker, which of course is unbelievably fantastic. Now, how much do you have to exile from your graveyard? I mean, I will point out that a lot of Golgari decks are graveyard decks that don't want to be exiling stuff from their graveyard. There is that, right? So you do have to take that into consideration. Let's say, play through the scenario here, I get a Soul Ring off the battlefield, right? Because I'm just throwing that into the mix on top of the Smothering Tithe I already want to hit. And then a really good creature, maybe, let's say it's a 4 mana value creature as well. And let's say there's a 3 mana value planeswalker like a Teferi or an Oko or something like that on the battlefield. So I got a 3, 4, 4, and a 1. Right? What is that? 9, 12? Did I add that correctly? So I have to exile 12 mana value from my graveyard. That's not super hard, right? I mean, again, do you want to though? That's the only issue there. How good is this removal spell? It's a little bit tough to evaluate. It's certainly going to see a lot of play in the format. It's a toughie though, because again, black and green already have fantastic removal, but this can be really, really good. Next up, Bolt Bender, and this is a card that I will certainly be putting in decks. It's something I've actually talked about recently, that it's really one of the best things that red can do in the format, and here's another great option. 3 in a red, Goblin Wizard 4/2. So already a Goblin or a Wizard, that fits in a lot of themes. Has Disguise 1 in a red, so again, another new ability from this set, which essentially is Morph, but the Morph creature has Ward 2, right? So you cast this card face down for 3 as a 2/2 creature with Ward 2. Turn it up at any time for its disguise cost, so it only costs 2 mana to flip up. When Bolt Bender is turned face up, you may choose new targets for any number of other spells and or abilities, which of course is that Bolt Bend effect, which is what this referencing obviously. Now, of course, Bolt Bend costs 4, but will a lot of times only cost 1. Is that better than this? This is going to end up costing you 5, but I wouldn't think about it that way. In the moment, you're not going to cast this for 5 right away. It's not an instant. It's a morphed creature that you're turning over. So it's going to cost 2 in that moment. The moment where you actually need to redirect stuff, it's only going to cost 2 mana. That's pretty darn good. And this is going to hit any number of spells or abilities. Now, how often is it going to be doing that? Probably not a lot. I would say 99% of the time, you're likely going to be just using one spell or ability and redirecting it. But the opportunity to do more than one thing could be pretty neat. It's definitely a card. I'm going to be putting this in at least one deck. It's definitely a card that's going to see play in the format. All right, moving on. War Leader's Call. Certainly a card that's going to see play in the Commander format, but because it's a 2-color card, how many decks? Who knows? 1 red and a white enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1. That goes in a lot of decks, right? It is an Anthem. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's an Impact Tremors, right? This is an Anthem and an Impact Tremors stapled into one card. Pretty fantastic. It is extra good in certain decks, but again, is one of those cards that could probably go in a whole lot of decks. There's a whole lot of decks out there that are absolutely going to love this card, and it's going to be a slam dunk for them for sure. Let's talk about Analyze the Pollen. 1 green mana sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect evidence 8. So, of course, here we have an actual number. Exile cards with total mana value 8 or greater from your graveyard. I guess I should point out that you can exile more than that mana value if you want to. So you don't need the exact mana value. And more importantly, you could exile your entire graveyard if you wanted to. I'm not sure why you would want to, but you could, with this ability, exile your entire graveyard. Search your library for a basic land card. That's not super great, but it is usable if evidence was collected. So if you did the additional cost part, instead search your library for a creature or land card. Reveal a card and put it in your hand, then shuffle. So if you're really hard up early in the game, this can be turn 1. I just cast this to go get that basic land that I need, because I am playing a 3-color deck and I don't have, blue mana available to me, so I go grab an island. That's not terrible. That is usable. It's okay. But likely you're going to not want to do that unless you absolutely have to, unless you're desperate, because 1 green mana, I go get any creature or land card. Not basic land card, reveal it and put it in my hand. That's fantastic, right? This is absolutely going to go in my Name as One deck because I want to be doing both of those. I want to go search for a land card because I probably want my Urborg or something like that. Maybe my Command Beacon. There's lots of really important lands in that deck, but I can also just go get a creature card. And of course, there's lots of great creatures in that deck as well. So it's a slam dunk in a whole lot of decks for sure. Great commander card. All right, Unexplained Absence. 3 and a white, instant. For each player, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls. For each permanent exiled this way, its controller cloaks the top card of their library. Again, another new ability. Cloaking, which essentially is just manifesting, but with the ward 2. Not super original, but whatever. To cloak a card, you put it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and it's got the ward 2. You can turn it face up anytime if you pay its mana cost, but only if it's a creature card. However, I will point out, if you have a mana-infested card and it's not a creature card, you can flip it over by blinking it if you happen to be playing a blinking deck. So, a couple important things here. First of all, this is for each player, and it's exile up to 1 target non-land permanent. So you can do this on yourself if you want to. If you have a useless permanent in play, you can exile that useless permanent and manifest the top card of your library. If you want to do that, maybe you do, maybe you don't. It is up to. But of course, the big part here is I get to exile a permanent from each of my opponents for 4 mana at instant speed. How much play is this going to see? I don't know. There is so much fantastic removal in white. I got 2 mono white decks. Am I going to find room for this in there? I mean, I might have to. It is a non-land permanent, so it's going to hit everything but lands. But I think I definitely am going to have to take out something. I mean, even Excise the Imperfect, which I was a huge fan of last year. Is this just better than that now already? I think it probably is, right? It's already been power crept out of the format in less than a year. It's a pretty fantastic card. It's definitely going to be, it's up there as far as the white removal in the format for sure. Moving on to Show-Stopping Surprise. And I don't know how many of these cards are really going to get, there's a few cards here that have gotten buzz that I've heard people talking about already, that have been talked about on my Discord with my patrons and whatnot. This is one I haven't seen anyone talk about yet. I don't know if anyone's talking about it, but it's phenomenal. So 3 red, instant, choose target creature you control. Turn it face up. If it's face down, then it deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. So there might be the possibility where people are looking at this card and going, oh, turn it face up if it's face down. So I just don't want to play this in any deck where I'm not doing the morph manifest thing, right? No, let's just ignore that, because if it's face down, you turn it face up. If it's already face up, then that part just doesn't do anything, right? turn it face up if it's face down. If it's already face up, then you just follow along with the rest of the card, which is then it deals damage equal to its power to each other creature, which is a fantastic board wipe. Of course, the comparison here is to Chandra's Ignition, which is a really popular card in the Commander format, pretty expensive for that reason as well, has been one of the most popular board wipes in the format for as long as I've been playing the Commander format, because it is a way to basically save your creature, your commander typically, and get everything else off the board. Chandra's Ignition does also hit opponents, and there is a lot of decks that are running Chandra's Ignition that probably want that part that hits the opponents. For me, in my Browlin deck where I play that card, that is good, but it's not incredibly necessary, and this card's going to go in there as well. Now, I can turn a face-up creature if it's face down if I want to, which, I don't know, might be relevant at some point, but for me, I'm thinking this is probably better than Chandra's Ignition in a lot of decks because it's instant speed. And instant speed board wipes are fantastic. You're just going to deal damage equal to that creature's power to each other creature, wipe everyone else's board, you keep your best creature, then you untap on your turn and do whatever else you want to do. This might be one of the best red board wipes in the format now. I think it's fantastic. Next up, Evoke Masquerade. And this is one of those cards. There's a few cards here that I had to read over a few times because I'm like, that seems way too good. So 3 and a black enchantment with flash. When Evoke Masquerade enters the battlefield, put an imposter counter on each creature you control. All your creatures. And it has flash, remember. Whenever a creature you control with an imposter counter on it dies, exile it. Return up to one other target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That seems fantastic, right? Now, of course, I know people will point out the creatures that are dying. So let's say I got 4 creatures in play. I'm putting a imposter counter on each of them as they all die. And of course, because this has flash, the best place to use this is in that board wipe scenario. It is a response to board wipes, and black is not the best color at protecting its stuff, as I just talked about in my best colors video. You obviously can't get back the creatures that are getting exiled by this, right? That, I guess, is sort of the downside, but that to me is just making it so that this card is not absurdly busted. If I have 4 creatures in play, someone is casting a board wipe, those creatures now die and then get exiled, and then I can get other creatures. So if I don't have any creatures in my graveyard, it doesn't seem great, but of course, how often is it that a black deck is going to have creatures in their graveyard, right? I will also point out, okay, this card says whenever a creature you control with an imposter counter on it dies, exile it. This is not a replacement effect. Your creature is dying, which is really important. A lot of those black decks want the dies triggers, okay? I will also point out, if I have 4 creatures in play with imposter counters on them, okay, and someone board wipes, all right? Someone casts a Wrath of God. This will trigger 4 separate times, because whenever a creature you control with an imposter counter on it dies, right? So those 4 separate triggers go on the stack. All those creatures have died. They've gone to the graveyard. They're sitting in the graveyard. In order for this to trigger, those creatures have to die, which means they have to be in the graveyard. Then I exile them. However, if I stack the triggers appropriately, let's say my commander is one of those 4, right? I have my commander, the trigger from my commander go on the stack first, so of course it resolves last. So when the first creature gets exiled from the graveyard, return up to one other target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Okay, well, my commander is currently sitting in the graveyard, so I can return that to the battlefield, right? And of course, once it's returned to the battlefield, it's considered a new creature. And when I finally get to the last trigger on this, instead of exiling my commander from the graveyard, it's already in play. It's going to fizzle. It's not going to do anything. So you can, if I have 4 creatures in play, I'm quite certain this works. If I have 4 creatures in play with imposter counters on them and they all go to the graveyard, I can use the triggers from the first 2 to get back the other 2. Say if there's 2 of those creatures I really want back, I can make sure 2 of them get exiled so that I get the other 2 back. I'm quite certain that works. So you can do that. But even if you're not doing that, it is still a fantastic card. Let's talk about Druid's Charm. And, you know, when I first saw this on the Discord, I was like, hey, maybe they're going to be making a cycle. That would be great. Usually when they do charms, it's a cycle. We do have Archmage's Charm already, which of course is the blue version of this. So now we have a green version. Are they going to end up making other colored versions? Who knows? I really like this. I liked when they did Archmage's Charm, and I like this one as well because I like the more colored mana symbols. I really like for them to be doing that more. The more colored mana symbols means it's going to be harder for people to shoehorn it into every deck, which of course people will want to do with this card. So green, green, green instant. So outside of a mono green deck, It's going to be tough. Choose one. Search your library for a creature or land card. Reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield tapped if it's a land card. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Wow. If this card was only doing that, it's already worth putting in so many decks. Search your library for any creature or land card. If it's a land, you put it directly onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you just put it in your hand. That's phenomenal. Just that alone. So many decks want. But also, I guess if you don't want to be doing that, there are other things as well. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So a removal option. I would say for sure that is the least likeliest one you're going to be doing, because also you can exile an artifact or an enchantment. Wow, wow, wow. I can't imagine there's a mono green deck out there that wouldn't love to have this card. I know mine does. Now we get up to 2-color, right? How many 2-color green decks are going to want this card? Probably all of them, right? Even a white-green deck, okay? So I have 2 white-green decks. Both of them, I can exile artifacts and enchantments really, really well. So I probably don't want to do that. Both of them, I can remove creatures really well, because of course white does that really, really well. So I don't really need to do that other ability, but both of them want to be searching for creatures and lands, right? So I might find room for, for sure one of them, I might find room for this card, even though it is the 3 green. I'm so glad that they made it green, 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 because everyone's going to want this card in their decks. It's doing so much. Again, the tutor option is so good that even the other ones that are also good might not get used so much. Wow, this card's going to get played a lot. As you can probably tell, as I move up this list, I'm getting more and more to the cards that are going to get played more and more. And Crime Novelist is one of those cards that I saw a lot of buzz about as soon as it got spoiled. So 2 in a red, Goblin Bard, 1/3. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Crime Novelist and add a red. So this fits into the category of it's going to get played a ton because of the power level, the power possibility of what it can be doing, rather than it fits in a ton of decks. It doesn't fit in a ton of decks, but it's going to get played a lot because of the power level that is available to you when you're using it. Of course, you're going to want it in a deck that's sacrificing artifacts, because if you're not sacrificing artifacts, it doesn't do anything. But of course, that fits in a lot of themes, particularly the treasures, and that's where people are probably going to be losing their minds over this card, because whenever I sacrifice a treasure, I'm going to get a red mana. So you're essentially getting double mana off of all your treasures, right? I think that's probably the best place where this can be used. I don't know. I have a sacrifice artifact deck. Oh boy, am I going to be able to find room for this? I don't know. It is kind of a treasure theme as well. It basically doubles your treasure. That's the best. And obviously you're piling counters on this guy as well, which doesn't exactly hurt. This one, I honestly, maybe it is a little bit too much hype over this card. Is it actually as good as, because there is a ton of situations where this card's actually not that great at all. This is only whenever you sacrifice an artifact. So in specific scenarios, this card's going to be bonkers, but in a whole lot of other scenarios, it's not going to be super great. So this is a bit of a tough one to evaluate. How much play is this actually going to see in the format? It's definitely going to see play. Any treasure deck, people are going to be running this for sure. You got a Prosper deck? There's a super popular commander in the format that is probably going to want this guy. Outside of the treasure theme, once we get away from treasures, treasures obviously is an incredibly popular theme in the format, but after we get away from that, now I think it trails off quickly. So it's hard to say. Moving on to Trouble in Pairs, and I'm definitely getting to the point here where I'm getting to the cards that are going to be played in an absurd amount of decks. And this certainly is going to be one of the most popular cards from this set. 2 white enchantment. And let me just point out, thank goodness they at least made it 2 white pips. And we don't have another Smothering Tithe on our hands, okay? Again, more colored pips, Wizards of the Coast, please. So it's an enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. So first of all, that's already good. It doesn't even affect you, so you can take extra turns. It only affects opponents. So we already got a nice little added bonus on this card, but that's not going to be the main reason why people are putting it in their decks. Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or cast their second spell each turn, you draw a card. Holy man. Clearly, Wizards of the Coast did not watch my best colors video where I had white coming out on top. And the reason why I had white coming out on top is because I don't think white needs the help in the format in almost any category, certainly not card draw. White already draws cards really, really well in the Commander format. What I pointed out in that video, though, is white doesn't do the big swings, right? I refill my hand with 7-8 cards. White doesn't do that very well. But what it does really, really, really well is the instances of card draw like this, where something happens, something triggers, and I get to draw a card. And then this thing happens, and I get to draw a card. This might be the granddaddy of them all, because whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, that can just be one of those white effects that prevents your opponents from attacking you with more than one creature. That's good too. Oh, now my opponents just won't attack me with two or more creatures? Okay, great. I'm okay with that, right? They won't draw their second card each turn. I mean, okay. If your opponents just don't want to do this or cast their second spell each turn, if they don't want to do any of that stuff, if they want to avoid doing all that stuff, because I think people will point that out. Just like you maybe could with Smothering Tithe. Oh, well, people will just pay the 2 and then you don't get your treasure token, as people probably said when Smothering Tithe first came out. Okay, that's good too. You know, anytime you give your opponents the option, okay, fine, but then they're not doing that thing. It's a win-win for me. So if my opponents are never going to attack me with more than one creature, if they're never going to draw their second card each turn, and if they're never going to cast their second spell each turn, okay, that's good too. But of course, that stuff is going to be happening. Nobody wants to pay for Smothering Tithe, as I say all the time. Nobody wants to pay for Ghostly Prison, okay? Nobody wants to pay for Rhystic Study, right? What was the video I made? Commander players want to do the stuff. They're not going to forego doing stuff. They want to do stuff. And they don't care if you're drawing cards. People won't even pay the 1 for Rhystic Study, okay? Trust me, they're not going to stop from doing the stuff that they want to do. And it is possible you get multiple draws on multiple turns from this card, right? Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, so they attack you, you get to draw a card. Then they draw their second card on their turn, and you get to draw a card. Then they cast their second spell on each turn, and you get to draw a card. You could be drawing 3 cards per turn from each opponent with this, possibly, right? And on top of that, if they want to cast an extra turn spell, that's completely wasted. This card is ridiculous. I mean, comparing it to Smothering Tithe, I guess you could. Maybe Smuggler's Share is a better comparison because it has lots of different options. As I've talked about in the past, Smothering Tithe is, obviously it's a great card, but it's a tad overrated. I have seen lots of situations where people are sitting there cranking out treasure tokens with their Smothering Tithe, but they're empty-handed, so they're not getting really much out of it. They're like, oh, wow, I got a bunch of mana that I can't use, right? You're always going to be able to use the cards you're drawing, right? So that's never a bad thing. This card's ridiculous. Wow. How much is it going to cost? I don't know. I'm definitely going to try to get my hands on at least 1 copy of it. You know, I'm the guy who I don't want to just shoehorn cards into every single deck. I might buy 1 of these, right? I have Smothering Tithe in 1 deck right now currently. Smuggler's Share as well, I have in only 1 deck. And this might be as well one of those cards that maybe I'll just get 1 copy of it and put it in 1 deck. The one where it maybe fits the best, although having your opponents not take extra turns and drawing cards fits into every deck. So where is it the best fit? I guess we'll see. Certainly, it's going to be one of the most popular cards from this set in the Commander format, but not the most popular. And I had already made a video last week talking about some of the lands that everyone's going to be putting in their Commander decks. And Escape Tunnel, I have to give a mention here. There are some other lands as well that, of course, are going to get lots of play in the Commander format from this set. I already made a video about it. You can go check it out if you want me to see me talk about those cards. I will give Escape Tunnel a special mention here because I predicted, maybe we'll see, it could be the most popular card from this set for Commander because it is essentially an Evolving Wilds, but with an added bonus. It's a Power Crept Evolving Wilds, which is already one of the most popular lands in the entire format. So you sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. How many decks are already doing that? All the ones playing Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse or any of those effects. There's lots. If you want to be sacrificing permanents, there's tons of decks that want that. If you want to be having lands go to your graveyard, there's lots of decks that want that. If you just want a Revolt trigger, you know, like my Lulu deck, for example, where I don't even play Evolving Wilds in any decks except that deck because I want that left the battlefield trigger. Lots of decks want that. And then on top of that, if you have any deck where you have a creature power 2 or less that you don't want blocked, because you can also tap this and sacrifice it to have target creature with power 2 or less not be blocked this turn, which of course, now there's even more reason to put this in your deck, right? And as a lot of people have pointed out, you don't need to take Evolving Wilds out of your deck and replace it with this. You could. You just add it to your deck that already has Evolving Wilds in it, or any of those sack lands, whatever the case may be. Certainly, this is going to be an incredibly popular card in the Commander format for sure, but might not be the most popular card in the format. There's another card from this set that, again, I don't know if anyone's talking about it, but I noticed it, as the spoilers were going on. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that might be the most popular card from this set. And that card is Demand Answers. It's just a common. It's not really doing a whole lot. It's got really cool art. Really cool art. I love that art. 1 in a red instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or discard a card and draw 2 cards. That's it. Not a lot of pizzazz. Not really exciting. But I predict, except for maybe Escape Tunnel, that would be the only exception. Other than that, I predict this will be the most popular card from this set. And the reason why is because it is a power crept, again, Thrill of Possibility. And Thrill of Possibility is a incredibly popular card in the Commander format, currently in 191,000 decks on EDH Rec. And again, this is another card that when it came out, I think it came out in Throne of Eldraine. Nobody was talking about it. I certainly didn't talk about it. I didn't notice it. It wasn't until maybe years later that I saw it was super popular in the Commander format. And again, if you're playing Thrill of Possibility, Demand Answers is just better, because now you can sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, right? So now you have 2 options. It's doing everything else the same. It also has better art. 2 mana instant speed, discard a card, draw 2 cards, but also I can sacrifice an artifact instead of discarding a card if I don't want to, right? If I don't have any cards in hand, that's where Thrill of Possibility is way worse. Later in a game, I don't have any cards in hand and I need to put cards in hand. How can I cast Thrill of Possibility? I can't, because I have nothing to discard. With Demand Answers, now I can sacrifice my Arcane Signet, which I don't need anymore, and draw 2 cards. That is miles better than Thrill of Possibility, in my opinion. So we already have a card that is played a whole ton in the Commander format, and we now have in my opinion, way, way better version in Demand Answers. But on top of that, again, it fits in the discard theme, right? Which Thrill of Possibility does. Again, I don't love Thrill of Possibility. I have it in my Browlin deck because that's the only place I would ever play that card. It's not a great card draw option, but you can play it in a discard theme because the discard part of it is actually a benefit for you. Demand Answers, same thing. And of course, that's going to go in my Browlin deck because just a power crept version of Thrill of Possibility, but also it can go in my Lulu deck because my Lulu deck is a sacrifice artifact theme. So now, again, just like with Escape Tunnel, where it replaces that, it's a power crept version of that card, but it also goes in all those other decks that now want to be sacrificing artifacts, which of course in red, there's an absolute ton of those. This could very easily, wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, despite all the powerful, fantastic Commander cards we got from this set, this could very easily, sneaking under the radar, be the most popular card from this set for Commander, maybe one of the most popular cards in the entire format at some point. It wouldn't surprise me at all. There you go. About 20 cards, give or take, that I think for sure are going to see a bunch of play in the Commander format. And again, I will be talking about probably about 20 more cards in another video. And I also will be talking about the best commanders from this set as well. There's so much to talk about from this set, an absolute ton for sure. So stay tuned for that. You guys let me know what your favorite cards are from this set. What do you think of the cards that I just mentioned? Which ones are you going to be shoehorning into as many decks as you can? That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.